So I have taught Chinese for more than 20 years, and one of the most common questions from my American students is that Chinese people never say "bu," which means no. Well, but that's not because they do not disagree. It's because no in Chinese does something very differently. And once you understand that, Chinese conversations suddenly make more sense. So every year, one of my students asks me the same question. Why would the people give me a straight answer in Chinese? They're very frustrated because they think something or someone is being unclear or even dishonest, which is a big no no in the Western culture. Of course, it's a big no no in Chinese culture as well. But here's the problem. They are listening for yes or no in a language that almost never use neither. For example, in most of the part of the American culture, saying no is very clear and it saves time. It sets boundaries. It's honest and it's efficient. However, in Chinese culture, saying no creates distance, close the door, and it's not polite, could be rude in most of the situations. So instead of saying boo directly, Chinese speakers leave the door half open. What's that mean? Let's show you some of the examples in real life. So imagine you ask, 明天我们见面吗? Can we meet tomorrow? In English, the answer is usually either yes or no, probably with some more detailed information. For example, the time, the location, even something you plan to eat or do. But in Chinese, you might hear something like that. 哦，我看看吧。啊，可能，但是有点忙。啊，到时候再说吧。So 我看看吧 means let me see. See what? Unclear. 可能，但是我有点忙。Well, that's possible, but I'm a little bit busy. 到时候再说 means let's see when the time arrives. So what time, when it will arrive, unclear. So that's to everyone's ear, it sounds uncertain, right? Especially if you're not a native Chinese speaker. To the Chinese ear, they are just a very polite refusal. So although none of the three sentences said no directly, there is no boo in any of them. But for most Chinese people, it's a super clear no. Well, if you live in China, for the first year, if you move to China, you probably will feel people were not very reliable because from the daily conversation to some of the social circumstances, they never committed and they never refused. So it probably took the foreign resident at least 1 or 2 years to realize they were actually being very careful. So the boo, no, doesn't just reject the idea of that moment, but it also risks the relationship, which is the least thing people want to do. So Chinese avoids the word boo, but not the meaning of boo. There is a more extreme example. In Qing Dynasty, if you visit someone's house and you don't know if you need to leave, what's the answer? Is 上茶, serve the tea. Serve the tea just simply means bring the tea to the desk? Nope. It simply means it's time for you to go. we can dig much deeper in that. For example, when you visited, if the host didn't start drinking the tea, you should not be drinking it. And when the host asks the servant to serve the tea, that means you have been there too long and it's time for you to leave. So although this part of the tradition has been faded out and washed out by the Cultural Revolution and all the movements after the Qing declined, but the subtle feeling of the politeness in the daily conversation still very alive. This is why my students say they understand every word, but they still don't understand the conversation. And it's not only a Chinese language thing. I think it's even more challenging to understand in Japanese and Korea, which means they adopted the Confucianism and the way of talking from probably hundreds or thousand years ago, and still keep them alive and developed based on their own culture, which is a more complicated system of the politeness and the subtle meaning. So that's why in Chinese we have a certain word for that. It means 言外之意. 言外之意 basically just means the meaning outside of the language. I think in Japanese they have something very similar, means the one who how to read the air. So the meaning is in the air. The meaning is not in the sentence. So it is not what you said, but what is not said. So that's the way the Chinese culture is hard to understand. So that's why the conversation in Chinese sometimes are hard to understand, because they are way more than what the language or the word means, but rather it's a whole system about how to understand the people's meaning without the word or outside or beyond the word, but at the same time to keep the relationship safe. So that's also bring to the next topic. In our next video, I'm gonna talk about another big part of the Chinese politeness. This is the 面子, our face, and why Chinese people are so afraid of 丢脸, losing the face. So if you're interested, follow my YouTube channel for more. 再见。